organizing factor in our agreement to work together was that we were not equipped to train small businesses in business resiliency planning, but the Small Business Development Center was. But we had a serious interest in community resiliency, and more importantly, looking at the intersection of business resilience and community resilience. So that's what we've put together in our Resiliency Academy. First, I want to ground you a little bit in our thinking about resilience. So while as community development professionals, I feel like we've been around the word resilience. We use it from time to time. Our colleagues in climate change are using the word resilience. As staff, we decided we had to really understand this conceptually so we could begin to teach it. And I think most of us know that resilience is defined as responding to a shock or getting back to normal. But the more we read last spring and last summer, we began to see this emerging redefinition of resilience to be really thinking about going forward and looking forward to a different future, a different outcome, a better outcome. And so we've adopted that idea as part of Resiliency Academy, that we actually don't want to go back to where we were. We want to be in a much better, different place going forward.
So in June of 2020, before we started Resiliency Academy, our partners at SBDC conducted a survey of businesses in New Hampshire, really to understand the impact of the pandemic and assess the needs of small businesses. SBDC knew that many small businesses were really struggling, but this survey really helped hone in on some of the impacts, negative impacts, as well as some of the positives, hearing about businesses really innovating and pivoting throughout the pandemic. And SBDC received a really strong response to the survey, over 1,500 responses representing businesses across the state in different industries and of different sizes. And I want to highlight just two important findings from this survey. So the first was that only 19% of respondents had a resiliency plan prior to the pandemic. And 75% of respondents said having a resiliency plan will be really important to the success of their business in the future. So according to FEMA, 40% of businesses never reopen after a disaster. And a business resiliency plan is really critical for businesses to have a plan to not only stay afloat, but recover from disruptions and disturbances. So these findings, based on these findings, we really knew that it would be important for businesses to gain the skills and knowledge necessary to develop their business resiliency plan to recover and plan for the future.
So I would say that we were really happy with that survey work because it gave us an understanding that small businesses needed to do a resiliency plan, but we were really concerned that small businesses were just so swamped last year with changes and dealing with our constant change in regulations with regard to COVID, that we were unsure whether they were going to participate in resiliency planning. And we're happy to report that, yes, they have been participating, and we'll share a little more about that as we go forward. As we began to develop this content, we were also looking for a framework for community economic resilience. There's a lot of work around individual resilience, and we were really looking at something that would focus on the economy. And so we found a study that we really liked from Din and Pearson, 2015, which of course is pre-pandemic, but they were looking at ways to measure community economic resilience and develop this framework that we are now using in our course with 4 guiding questions that I think are really important. The first one is resilience of what? And in this case, we're asking our class participants to be focusing on their business and their community, and both. And then the second is resilient to what? And so most of our participants have come to our webinars and our classes because of the pandemic, But we've asked them to think about potential other shocks that they may see, whether it's a natural disaster, or currently we have a severe workforce shortage here in New Hampshire. And so we think we're really doing this resiliency work beyond the pandemic. And we're also doing some teaching around some assessment that needs to be done so you understand what resilience you're working on. I think most importantly is this framework adopts the question, resilience for whom? Who are the beneficiaries in resiliency work? And this is related to this evolving description of resiliency that I shared earlier that really asks us to include and consider everyone in our resiliency planning. And so we're asking businesses whether they're considering resiliency just for them as a business owner, but we're asking them, what does this mean for your employees? We're asking municipalities to consider what it means for them as an institution. What does it mean for neighbors? What does it mean for marginalized populations, et cetera? And this is where we do some teaching around community engagement, robust community engagement. And then finally, resiliency for what? What's the goal? Is it a better bottom line? Is it jobs, social benefits? We hear a lot about wanting a vibrant Main Street as being the what people are looking for. And here we've done some visioning work so that particularly communities can think about that better, different future under community economic resilience. So that led us to put together resiliency features. I think at this point, we just found we had so much we could teach. SBDC nationally has a business resiliency guide that was being adopted for the state of New Hampshire. That's very much focused on aspects for individual businesses. And so this is where we really looked at where do we bring business and community together. And we organized our ideas around 4 themes that you see here. I'll give you a second just to take a look at those. I would say this we put together in the planning process, and what we have found is our speakers and our teachers throughout Resiliency Academy have touched on all of these, either deliberately or just in their stories. And Casey and I are finding the most common theme that everyone is sharing in resiliency work at the community and business level is this importance of network systems and partnerships. We're just hearing that over and over again as being highly important. So these are the factors and features that we used in developing the course.
So I'll take a minute to orient you a little bit more to Resiliency Academy and how we're really working at the intersection of community and business resilience. So it's really unique in the sense that we're bringing together communities and businesses. As Molly mentioned, our past academies have really been focused on communities and topics like community engagement and Main Street. And there are always some businesses that attend as community volunteers because they want to see their Main Street become more vibrant or they want to work on improving their community. And so we've seen that it's really valuable to bring together communities and businesses. And on the topic of resilience, it totally makes sense. So our Resiliency Academy is marketed to businesses, community leaders, community volunteers, organizations, economic development professionals, and really anybody who's interested in the topic. And so the goal of businesses attending is really to gain the tools, the support, the knowledge and skills that they need to develop their business resiliency plan. And the Academy really walks them through step by step of doing that. Communities are benefiting by attending and learning about business resiliency so that they can go back to their community and help strengthen and retain businesses there. While we're not having communities develop their own separate resiliency plan, we're encouraging them to learn about these resiliency topics that they can then address in their municipal plans, whether it's a master plan or comprehensive plan or downtown improvement plan. There are ways to incorporate resilience into those plans. And then the middle here, we have these resiliency topics which businesses and communities alike are benefiting from. So those are things like measuring resilience, rural innovation, quality of life and belonging, cybersecurity, networks, and stories of pandemic adaptation, which we are weaving throughout each one of our sessions. So I want to take a step back and tell you a little bit more about how we have set up our Resiliency Academy. So there's two kind of different parts of Resiliency Academy, which we'll reference in this presentation. So we held two kickoff webinars in the fall of 2020. And then we are actually in the middle of holding our 5-session Resiliency Academy this spring. So these next couple of slides will really focus on these kickoff webinars. And really the purpose of these, well, first, I think we were hopeful that maybe in the spring, we might be able to do some in-person programming, and that has not worked out for us, but we'll share a little bit about what we've learned doing this virtual. But really the purpose of the kickoff webinars were to introduce the topic of resilience, gauge participant interest, as well as help market the spring 2021 Academy sessions. So we had 250 people register, and between two 90-minute webinars, we had a total of 128 participants. These webinars were free. We held them different days of the week and different times of day to try to maximize the number of participants that we could get, and had a really nice mix of participants. It was interesting for us that we had so many organizations coming when we were really marketing to communities and businesses, but found that organizations could learn a lot as well. And we shared some of the basics about resilience, how we're defining it, some factors for community and business resilience. And then Molly facilitated a panel of 3 different people talking about resilience from 3 different perspectives. So we had a small business owner, a community resilience planner, and an academic researcher, and just had a really engaging discussion about all things resilience, you know, how they define resilience, their experience observing businesses and communities throughout the pandemic. And one of their biggest messages was really about being flexible and adaptable, and kind of how now is the right time to work on resiliency planning while it's fresh in your mind, while we're in this pandemic. You know, how can we not only recover, but move to becoming more resilient for other things that are going to come our way. And through evaluation, we learned that our webinars in the fall were really well received, and we were pleased to hear that there was interest from participants in pursuing this topic further. So we use a couple different tools for our evaluation. First, we use some Zoom polls at the end of the webinar, as well as a Qualtrics survey afterwards. And we found that participants, you know, increased their understanding of a number of topics about resilience. We weren't surprised to find that only 20% of participants had a resiliency plan. So it showed to us, you know, that there was a real need for this. And again, 3/4 of participants were really interested in learning about resiliency. And we've seen a really strong participation in our Spring Academy. I'll pass it to Molly.
Thanks, Casey. So we began our Spring Academy, which took a great deal of planning, to be honest. But we were really excited because we felt that our communities and our businesses were so excited and interested in resiliency planning. So again, always working with the Small Business Development Center, which has been a great partnership for us, really strong partnership. Although I'll say, I know many of us Extension work in a variety of partnerships. You know, they had different things they wanted to get out of the Academy than we did as educators. So we did spend a lot of time talking about our educational philosophy and what we were trying to do here. And so our Spring Resiliency Academy, we are at session 4, which will be this week. But we have 5 2-hour sessions. Those are webinars. The last 30 minutes of that 2-hour session is dedicated to regional discussions. So in our Academy sessions, we have someone usually from Extension or a guest speaker, talk about some of the topics and themes we've shared today, and then we do this industry panel. And I would say what people love is hearing from the restaurant down the street or the retail business they're aware of, telling their story of how they adapted or transformed during the pandemic. And then we move everyone into regional discussions. Our state is broken up into 8 regions. And this is something very new for our state. We very highly supported. What we found is that most of our regions did not get together and talk about what they were doing in the pandemic. And so we've become the forum to do that. On the alternating weeks, we have a regional business cohort. And so all the businesses are invited to meet in their region with their SBDC advisor and work on their resiliency plan collectively. And then individual businesses are also invited to participate with their SBDC advisor to work either on their resiliency plan or other issues that they may be having as a small business. And we also, because this was online session, relied heavily on our Canvas learning management system. I'm going to let Casey tell you about that because she's really become the expert on that piece.
Thanks, Molly. So Canvas was something that was fun to learn. Really, if you haven't used Canvas, I'd say it's very user-friendly. We are using it to store materials and resources for our participants, as well as offer another form of engagement. So each week for each session, we have, the expectation is that our participants will spend about 30 minutes in Canvas. And so we've given them a few short readings, maybe a video or a podcast to listen to. And then they have the opportunity to go into the discussion board and share their perspective. And we've seen really great engagement in those discussion boards, especially the first couple. I'm interested to kind of see how it pans out for the rest of the academy, as we've not fully evaluated it. But this was something that we had always wanted to do or tried to do, through Padlet or through Box, was sharing materials with our past academy participants. And so I think Canvas has been a really nice tool for getting us organized and sharing all of those resources in one place for people. And with over 100 participants, it gives that extra way for people to engage and message each other and talk on the discussion board. So that's been fun to watch. Sorry about that. So what have we learned? So like I said, we haven't gotten through the whole academy. We haven't evaluated it fully, but these are just some of the things, some observations that we've made. So it's been nice to have so many different ways to engage. We see in Canvas, people are using the discussion boards. We see in our Zoom sessions, I'm amazed by how active people are in the chat, asking questions to panelists. Not only that, but chatting with each other, which is nice to see. We see people really engaging in the regional discussions. There was one session where we had kind of a little technical blip with the regional discussions, and we heard from people that they really wanted those. So they were finding that really valuable, which is nice to hear. The business cohorts have provided another way for businesses to network and engage, which is great. As Molly talked about, the way that our sessions are set up, we have an extension staff or an expert sharing information about a broader resiliency topic. And we were so pleased to hear that participants are really liking the mix of that broader topic, as well as the peer-to-peer learning that they're getting from those business industry panels, hearing directly from small business owners and community leaders. We're finding that different perspectives are really important on these business industry panels. Even within one industry, there are so many types of businesses with regard to experience, size. So it's been interesting to hear like the really engaged discussion that people are having on these panels. And even though they're different, they can all relate to each other and kind of share and learn from each other. So obviously the virtual program allows for a greater number of participants, and we're finding that there are pros and cons to this. It's nice that we're able to reach, over 100 people consistently week to week. But, there are challenges with the level of engagement that we're able to connect with these folks. Molly and I are used to having an academy of 30 people and really getting to know people. And through the tools that we've implemented, there is some of that, but it's still just different. With the virtual program setup, there's lots of ways to evaluate. We're looking forward to doing, Qualtrics evaluation after the academy, as well as some long-term evaluation, probably some interviews and longer-term surveying. But through using Zoom and Canvas, we also have access to so much more data than we normally would. We can measure how long people are staying on the Zoom sessions, how many people are participating in the polls. On Canvas, we're able to see how many people downloaded a particular resource, and we can measure engagement in terms of what's going on the discussion board. So looking forward to digging in and analyzing those data. And as Molly said, the partnership is really rewarding and challenging. I would say, challenging in the sense that we have 5 2-hour-long sessions, and we have so many topics that we're trying to prioritize, bringing them in and having a nice balance for businesses and communities. And, rewarding in the sense that it's pretty unique that we're able to bring together this academy for small businesses and communities. And, it's just such an important topic at this time that it's been rewarding to be able to do this with them.
And I know we have just a minute left, so I'll share this about what we're hearing. So when we started this work a year ago, we were not thinking of this as business retention work. We have done a business retention and engagement program for years. I know the challenges of getting communities to get to know their businesses and businesses being open to that and building that network and mutual understanding and trust. That is happening. The pandemic forced that. Businesses needed their municipalities to help them move the dining tables out on the sidewalk and change state regulations, et cetera. And so what we're finding is that business resiliency really is tied deeply into this business retention work, and we think it will be going forward. And then I'll just say finally that we have 3 more weeks of Resiliency Academy. We'll do a really robust evaluation. And then we have CARES Act money to do a round 2 for the next year. Likely we'll have some materials online, hope to do some in-person training, depending on what the evaluation says. And we hope to do some research writing and publishing on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Molly and Casey, both very much. Our next presentation is with Sarah Seams and Julianne Dunn from Oklahoma State University, and they'll be sharing a little more on business retention and expansion in rural settings.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us either this morning or this afternoon, I guess, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm Sarah Seams. I'm an Assistant Extension Specialist at Oklahoma State University Extension, and I am the Oklahoma Coordinator for the Create Bridges Pilot Program, which is a multi-state pilot program. And I'm joined today by Julianne Dunn, and we are 2 of a much larger group of this multi-state team, but I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself.
I'm Julianne Dunn, as Sarah pronounced my name correctly, which is always lovely. I'm an instructor of economic development at University of Arkansas, System Division of Agriculture, Community Professional and Economic Development. And I did that in one breath. And I am one of the state leads for the state of Arkansas for the phase 1 part of Create Bridges. But looking at our participants today, we have a lot of Create Bridges people here, so that makes me feel very loved and included. So shout out to Susan and Russ and Michael and Grace and Mike, and of course my 2 colleagues, Dr. Wayne Miller and Dr. Stacy McCullough. So we've got a very supportive group, plus everyone else here.
Yes, thank you. So as Julianne mentioned, we are part of phase 1. So Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Arkansas are the phase 1 states in this pilot program. We launched in about December of 2018. And then this past year, we brought on 3 new states, North Carolina, Illinois, and New Mexico Extension. And we're excited to have them joining us, many of whom are in the session today as well. And so just briefly, what is Create Bridges? So we have BR&E as a larger, or as a component to a larger program. Create Bridges is an acronym. It stands for Celebrating Retail, Accommodations, Tourism, and Entertainment by Building Real Innovations and Developing Growth Economies. So you'll see why we like to call it Create Bridges. There are kind of 3 tenets, 3 purposes to this program. The first one is to really raise awareness of the role that retail, accommodations, tourism, and entertainment play in our local economies and our local rural economies. Just looking historically, a lot of jobs that our rural economies had previously relied on were leaving our communities, and retail, accommodations, these hospitality sectors were really remaining as the backbone, but they weren't really getting the focus and resources that some other industries like maybe energy or agriculture had previously received. So that's kind of the first purpose. The second is to determine challenges, barriers, and opportunities related to those businesses, which we primarily did through community programs and survey efforts, which include the BR&E program that we're here to talk about today. And then we use all that information to inform, to develop and implement strategies to strengthen the retail and hospitality sectors in these communities. All right. So this graphic shows what I just mentioned. It shows how BR&E is a component of this larger program, and it shows how we use these various program components to inform strategies and actions that will help to strengthen the local economies of the regions that we're working with. A unique feature to this pilot program, which I just have to mention, is that we actually have a companion survey to the BR&E, which targeted employees. And it allowed us to learn more about their needs, their challenges, and what opportunities they see in their work with retail and hospitality. So what makes this program a little bit different than maybe a citywide or countywide initiative or BR&E program? The idea is that this program will really draw on collaborations beyond a single town or a single county to really make the best use of resources and partnerships, especially in our more rural areas. And it offers a few advantages. The regional approach does. It helps provide an ideal number of workforce and business participants, so we can complement our smaller communities with maybe some larger communities in an area. And then working regionally allows the program to, again, pool resources and partnerships, which can be more successful in increasing the likelihood of economic development in our rural areas.
So what we did for that BR&E portion is we conducted a pretty expansive survey in our regions, and our regions were chosen. We put out an RFP, and so communities self-selected that they were interested in these components. And we used a survey that we modified for Minnesota because Sarah and I are both trained by Darger and Crew, and very much biased in that kind of point of view. And we also recognize the challenge of, if we are regional, like doing one-on-one is difficult to get a true representation. So we immediately, once trained, start to fiddle, which is of course an appropriate thing to do with a standard practice that's been around for decades. Our survey itself, we focused on questions about the labor force, which came in handy when we got into COVID-19 time. We talked about customers and business management and changes that business owners have faced over the past 3 years and what they're looking forward to. And of course, Sarah in phase 1 did a lot of their BR&E prior to the pandemic. So unsurprisingly, I guess to most people in this room, a lot of what they had issues with were still issues during the pandemic. We also asked about their interactions and relationships with city, county, and regional organizations, and what local or regional economic development agencies they had interacted with and helped them. We also asked them about tourism and their role in regional tourism, and what opportunities in the area they saw in their point of view. We asked 28 questions. Phase 2 had a few more questions because of the pandemic, because they started implementing it during the pandemic, which is impressive to us. But what we did, each state had a different number of interviews that we tried to do them in 2 different ways. We did the classic one-on-one interview, and we also tried to incorporate a number of people into roundtable workshops, roundtable interviews, where we brought people together to be able to talk about their answers together. And then from there we went to strategy. So we did this in 4 primary different ways. So I'll let Sarah talk about the first way.
Okay. So here in Oklahoma, we started out with the very traditional volunteer visitor model. We recruited local volunteers. We do have a steering committee that we work with of local stakeholders. So we started with that group as kind of our core group of volunteers, and then they recruited within their communities others to come in. We trained them in what BRNE is and how to conduct the volunteer visitor survey, and helped them schedule those survey interviews with businesses, and then provided a way for them to confidentially return those surveys to us here at the university, where we work to summarize them. And what we thought would be most helpful would be to show you all a chart of kind of the different styles that we used, and what that process included, and what some of the pros and cons are. So that's what you'll see in the next couple of slides. Again, a lot of pros with the local volunteer visitors. We were able to collect a lot of surveys in a shorter amount of time. But of course, as you would expect, there's inconsistencies with local volunteers and, their responses. One person might write down something that they felt was really important, and someone else may not think that something the business owner said was as important and maybe didn't note it. So we definitely did see some inconsistencies with responses. But it did allow us to have a lot of local insight and community engagement. I think here in Oklahoma especially, we really gained momentum with our broader Create Bridges program when we started engaging local folks in this BRNE program. And again, we had to kind of work through some skepticism. There was the concern that businesses wouldn't want to take the time to work with locals to give feedback. It takes at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half for each survey. But we found that once we kind of got going, got some momentum, the businesses were really excited and engaged to share insight and have an opportunity to share concerns or feedback that they otherwise would never have had the opportunity to do so. And then I'm going to let Julianne talk a little bit. They did more one-on-one surveys.
So in Arkansas, we did a lot about, like Sarah said, I, as paid staff, did most of the BRNE interviews using volunteers when possible as the recorders, as well as helping with scheduling, because we ended up having over 116 responses. And we also did that partly because we submitted through IRB, and it was something IRB wanted us to do, is make sure that paid trained staff were conducting these interviews. I'm not sure we would go through IRB again, but it is cost prohibitive. I'm based in Central Arkansas, and our 2 regions that we were interviewing are North Central and Southwest. So the travel and everything was very cost prohibitive, but I was able to do consistent information, which led to some illuminating results for us. But I do think the ultimate challenge with doing one-on-one is with paid staff is, you don't get that true connection with the community because unless you live in the community. And I do say this play between these two is not a new conversation for the BRE community. I think it's played out pretty well in the Community Development Journal of Community Development Society, volume 48, they talk about these two, but then we decided to add more variations to it that we broke down in the next slide. Sarah, if you want to take on roundtables.
Yes, so in phase one, I mentioned we have University of Kentucky. They were the ones that we really learned more about the roundtable style from. And so in this model, what we did was we invited in local business owners to kind of a workshop setting where we shared with them what BRE is. We typically would serve a snack, a meal, do it around breakfast, around lunchtime as a little carrot to get them in. And then we basically went through the survey as a presentation with certain questions that they would answer on their own. So they would write down their own responses on an individual survey. And then we pulled out certain questions that would be table discussion questions. And with each table, we would have a moderator who would help facilitate that discussion. And then they would capture those table discussion responses. That actually, it worked great here in Oklahoma, even better than I had anticipated. In a lot of, in several of our roundtable workshops, it also provided an opportunity for business owners to network and learn in real time that a lot of them were dealing with very similar issues and kind of brainstorm solutions. So that was really exciting to see. Again, it helped us capture kind of a big group of data, in one go. Some of the challenges, of course, it's difficult to schedule. It's hard to get business owners away from their business. We tried to do it maybe before typical opening hours. So maybe from 8 to 9:30, if they had a business that opened at 9 or 10, they might be able to still get in and open. Or we would try to do it in the evening after they had closed. So again, there's those sorts of time constraints. We actually hosted one of our BRE roundtables with just a group of our tribal communities. So Julie and I will both kind of speak to this last BRE style that we use. But here in Oklahoma, we have several tribes that are significant business owners in some of the communities and within the region that we're working with. And so we worked with either the president or the chief of that tribe, as well as their HR departments, to help schedule the roundtable style workshop, but just with those tribal business owners. And we really felt like it helped provide a safe space for them to show up and share their concerns that they have operating a business in those communities as a tribal-based business. And again, as you can expect, it helped to confront some trust issues that they may have with sharing some of that information more broadly with broader community members. And Julianne, I'll let you speak a little bit to your Spanish language roundtables.
And I do have something to add too for the just general roundtables. We did it in two very different, and this goes to Michael Darger's question in the chat too. We did it in two different, one version of the roundtable, we did a 2-hour session. And the way we structured it is that we had individual responses we gave them the same survey that we gave to individual interviews. And so we had them answer certain questions like, how many employees do you have, part-time, full-time, hours, things that were very quantitative. We had them answer individually and then brought them together to discuss 7 or 8 of the questions that we felt were more discussion, ready. And that was the 2-hour version. I also did 2 versions of the roundtable within the structure of a Chamber of Commerce meeting. So 2 Chamber of Commerce let me take over their standard meeting. And that we really did focus on the 6 or 7 questions for the discussion period. And these were scheduled hour-long meetings. And honestly, I had to kick them out after an hour and 45 minutes because they just wanted to keep talking, which is a standard problem for all BRNE, is once you get them talking, no one's ever asked a question, so they just keep talking. For the Spanish language roundtable, we have a very large, growing Spanish-speaking population. And there was a standing disconnect with the English-speaking business owners. So at request from the Spanish business owner community, we set up a separate roundtable for them in Spanish, which is difficult because my Spanish is not spoken, it's understood. So I had to incorporate translators who were trained. I trained them in the BRE volunteer visitor training that we had set up for this. And I was there and present and able to answer some of the questions when they had questions. But what was really interesting for that particular question is because this affinity group had never been addressed as a community, as a business community, they had a lot of misconceptions of how they can interact with local agencies. And so we were able to do some follow-up, almost immediate red flag activities because there was misconceptions of things that they can access, and even things as small as whether or not they were able to attend public city council meetings as just a citizen. So that was really eye-opening, but based on the discussion, again, we were scheduled for 2 hours. They ended up staying for 3.5 hours. There was delicious food, I think that had a part of it, but they really kept talking about things that were directly relating, like Sarah talking to who they were as Spanish-speaking business owners. Although a lot of their businesses are bilingual and they're able to speak, they're very fluent in both languages, being able to speak in the language that their first language really did lead to different kind of conversation and able to connect with business owners like them that they had not been able to do when it was like a mixed group. The translation with the coding at the end to lead to strategies was a little bit difficult, but it was something we anticipated and planned for. But just like all roundtables, because we only have a few questions and they do tend to fixate on a question or two, and we'll break out and we'll come back to it because they keep wanting to talk about a specific issue in their community, and as we just go with it, and also helping gear it toward a more positive discussion rather than just like hating on individuals. And I think this is true for all 4 types of BRNE, is when there is some underlying community issues that you are not aware of, personality conflicts, all 4, we all know as BRE professionals, like we have to be able to help them move on to the next question without just like diving real deep into, oh my gosh, I hate that person and they've like actively gone against me and all these things. And it's like, oh, okay. Tell me how many things that, what could be opportunity for us. So those are the primary 4 that we utilized. And phase 2 is also utilizing. When the pandemic really became quite urgent, we also discussed with phase 2 quite a bit, as well as other BRNE programs that we were involved in, the virtual version of BRNE. And ultimately we did not use it because we were able to do more phone or in person safe distances. But what we talked about extensively, and it's something we wanted to share with you too, because I'm sure you have these conversations as well, is that the beauty of being an in-person or at these like roundtables, but especially with the in-person, is that our business owners can continue doing the work that they're doing, and a virtual BRNE in these rural communities with their connectivity issues, and like setting aside time from their business to talk to us, felt a little bit too onerous on the business owner. We've done a couple of phone versions of this, like people cut off quicker. Yeah, Stacey's referencing, I referenced this with other BRD programming. phone was a little bit better because people are more comfortable sitting on a phone, but when you're separating yourself for a Zoom, it's a little bit challenging. As well as scheduling it is a little bit, it seems more difficult when you're doing it virtual by phone. And as everyone's issue here is in rural areas, connectivity is a giant issue. And so those freeze or, you know, the dropping of the call, like it's more intense and leads to a disconnect. What I've referenced here is a screen disconnect that you just don't get when you're in person. I've like found, and I, you know, referenced with the other project that Stacy's talking about, the phone calls tend to end on time, where every BRD interview or roundtable has never ended on time. We also wanted to talk a little bit about things to think about when you're doing all these. I mean, BRD is always a budget issue if you decide to do it by paid staff, like setting aside the money for travel and individual timing. And setting up time constraints is like the primary issues facing doing something like this. We found that, you know, the problem with having a community identify the business to engage is that often they're still listing the businesses that they always interact with, which we found and when we were talking about the southwest part of Arkansas, is that they didn't always include the Spanish language businesses because they didn't go to their colleagues that spoke primarily Spanish in the business. And so it was something we had to overcome in both Oklahoma, well, actually in all of the states, is to ensure that we were truly representing all 4 sectors and all types of business owners. For all 4 of the ways we used, like, how do we as staff support it and train people to feel like they can take on and own on this and like be available all the time for all the questions when it's volunteer led, or for businesses to want to follow up with all the red flags. So those were the primary constraints for us, making sure everyone's included, that needs to be included, having the time to support our volunteers as they go through it. The budget, if it's staff-based, also like all the food we gave out for the roundtables, it adds up. But one thing we did really want, I know I'm really, really tight on time, is we wanted to talk about some of the informed strategies that came out of our BRNE, because this is always like the number 1 questions, things that we did. So we had 2 buckets of strategies. So a lot of people at first were saying like, oh, well, we'll have to just stop. You know, our research for phase 1 ended right around the time the pandemic started. So people were like, well, we have to come up with new research. And we found that a lot of the challenges that our businesses were facing were things that they had listed in their BRNE. It just became very amplified during the pandemic. So we came up with some emergency strategies over the summer and early fall to address some of the issues, and then have also created some long-term resources, and things like, you know, wanting to share successes for what the businesses are doing. And so on that last one, we have some logos for a podcast we created that uplifted some resilient, holler at Casey and Molly, some resilient businesses as they transitioned. And then we also created like a ton of resources to help businesses transition to a more web engagement with their customers. We had experts, Oklahoma and Arkansas partnered for some experts to come in and help retail owners. And this is all links that you can't access because we're on Zoom, but we will share this this PowerPoint, so that you can access them, and they're all free and available if you also want to use them if you don't already have them. But we went by really quickly, but we tried to encapsulate all these things that we deviated off the traditional BRNE.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah and Julianne. And we have next Jennifer Hawkins from the University of Minnesota on enhancing readiness for business succession for our next session.
Yes, hello. I'll just do a quick screen share. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My section of the presentation, I actually invited my colleague John Bennett to join as well. So I am a community economics educator based in Southeast Minnesota, and I'll be talking a little bit about a pilot program that we offered here in the Southeast region in 2020 on supporting business succession. So the reason we're looking at this is because it's estimated that over half of all small businesses are owned by baby boomers, and how they transition out of business ownership will have and is having broad economic development implications. Whether they decide to close or liquidate, sell, or transition to a family member can really have a big impact on a community beyond just the financial elements of the transition. It could be losing a bakery, hardware store, or other small business, and that means a loss of an amenity and quality of life for local residents. So that's a little bit of background on why we're looking at this, and I imagine that this is on your radar as well in your economic and community development work. A little bit about how we got to this point. Our former colleague, Liz Templin, a former extension educator, organized some research in 2016 and 2017 to better understand this issue of business succession. She'd been hearing from folks in the field, some of our economic development partners, that they were seeing businesses just close up shop because of a retirement, and we're starting to see the writing on the wall as they looked around their main streets and their business community and saw a lot of folks who might be nearing retirement age. So she did some research, published those findings in 2017 and 2018. Around the time I joined Extension, I was able to work a bit with Liz and a couple of other colleagues to start to create some programming around this research. And we launched a workshop, an in-person workshop for community leaders in 2018. And we did that in partnership with a group called Vision One. And I'll talk more about them because they were a key partner in our pilot program. But as we were sharing the research, we encountered Vision One, and they're an organization, a private company that is a business advisory firm who was doing quite a bit of work advising firms on business succession already. So we partnered with them in 2018 to offer this workshop for community leaders. So we were able to leverage our expertise in economic development and curriculum design and their deep knowledge of the business transition process to offer that workshop. But we continued to hear from economic developers in the field and beyond that this is still a hot topic and they wanted more support and guidance. So in 2019, we received a grant from a regional foundation down here in Southeast Minnesota to create a pilot project that would bring together economic developers and business owners to enhance readiness for business succession. That was the title of our grant and the title of our course. So we started by engaging economic development professionals and really saw them as key stakeholders in this conversation. So our expectation was that the economic developers would recruit the businesses to participate, that they had the relationships with the businesses, they knew which businesses were in a position or maybe in a position in the next 5 years to transition. And so we had hoped to have about up to 10 businesses from each community participating. And we identified the communities through past conversations. They'd expressed interest in the business succession workshop or had questions and had reached out. So we had a sense of who maybe had this on their radar already. We ended up having 3 communities join the pilot, and we had 14 businesses register. The businesses included a gas station, a manufacturing company, a cabinet manufacturer, an attorney, and another service provider. So it was really a range of business types, business sizes. Some were, had 1 employee. The manufacturing firm was probably the largest with over, I think, 35 in that ballpark. And we had the economic development professionals participating in all the learning sessions. And then in between sessions, in between the content sessions, they would host in-person application sessions, either one-on-one or as a small group, to really apply what they had been learning through the program. It was free for the economic development professionals, but we had the businesses pay $100 to participate in this pilot. So we had learning objectives for both the businesses and the economic developers. So we were hoping the businesses would better understand the principles of succession and actively apply those directly to their business. And at the end of the 10 weeks would have developed a succession or transition plan for their company. For the economic developers, we really saw them as kind of a key cog in the wheel, so to speak, that we wanted to build their capacity through this program so that they were building skills to be able to do succession planning support beyond just the 10 weeks. So we wanted them to understand the importance of transition planning, why it matters, what resources existed around their community to help firms be able to explain these resources and ideas to area stakeholders, and then be in a position to create programs or activities to support transitions after that 10 weeks. So the way we did it is we created 5 90-minute modules. They were offered every other week over the course of 10 weeks. We had planned on using Zoom always. So when the pandemic hit, thankfully, we had already built in the Zoom platform and we're planning to use that. And so our programming was not really affected, and all of the businesses wanted to continue going through the program. I think we launched in March, right? Just like a couple of weeks before everything kind of shut down. But anyway, so we used Zoom, and we, as I mentioned, had opportunities to apply the learning between the sessions with the economic development leaders. We also used a Canvas site, like one of the earlier presentations, used that as a repository for resources and discussion questions. We posted the recordings of our sessions, but we also had a workbook that we had created that was mailed to all the participants that they were able to complete as we moved through the course. So for each session, we had a set of pages in the workbook that they could be completing that aligned with the content for that particular session. And then here you can see how we structured the course. It was designed around 5 topic areas. So the first one was preparing for succession. So this looked at the big picture, what to be thinking about, timing, taking stock of what they might already have in place. So getting just a sense of where they were already at. And then the second session explored owner readiness. So what were their own personal wealth goals, plans for after the business? What were their goals and priorities for them as an owner from that transition? The third session looked at business readiness. So we had them take stock of their financials, think about their employee and leadership transition. Were there key employees that they wanted to make sure were retained through the transition? How were they going to do that? As well as opportunities to grow value for the business before they sold it. So getting it in the best position they could to sell it for the highest price. And then the fourth session looked at external factors. So this was things like the timing of the transition, what might derail it, what might be out of their control that might derail it. So COVID was something that came up in the conversation, probably not a good time to sell the business during a pandemic, but so how do you manage that? How do you prepare for some of those potential external factors? We also talked about the ideal buyer or investor in this section for the businesses, and that varied business to business, of course. And then finally, the fifth session was, what do you do when you're ready to exit? When you're ready for the transition, what are the steps that you should be taking? So communicating the plan, executing the deal, that sort of thing. So, and then you can see between each of those were the sessions where they were applying it with their local economic development staff person. So we were really pleased with the outcomes. 100% of the businesses said that they would recommend the course to others. Everyone was able to describe what their plan was, how they were planning to prepare for their transition based on what they learned in the course. So that was really great to see. I just pulled a couple of quotes from the evaluations, putting it in writing. Some people had it in their heads, but really, having it on paper, they hadn't gotten there yet. So this was a prompt for them to complete, putting it all in writing, getting a business valuation to help identify opportunities to grow the business before they transitioned it, or is another example. And then 2 of our economic development participants did go ahead and create additional succession programming in their communities. So that was really great to see. They actually organized some workshops for the advisors or the potential advisors, like the accountants and lawyers, and kind of brought all those folks together to talk about where they were at and were they ready to be advising folks through a transition process. So a few insights, I think, looking back on the pilot that we did in 2020, the design was strong. We did achieve the learning objectives and the expected outcomes, so that was reassuring. We did get a sense, though, that the 10-week length was a bit too long. So that was an opportunity for adjustment looking ahead. Our external partnership in delivery, it created a bit of complexity. And as we think about, what this looks like as a long-term offering, we're still navigating that and trying to figure out what exactly that looks like. And then the comfort level for the economic developers as coaches could have probably been enhanced. They were really learning it as they walked through it with the businesses. And I think looking back, maybe a separate prep workshop for the economic developers before they go through it with the businesses would have maybe given them a bit more confidence. I think they did a great job in the work, but they might have felt more confident if they'd had some exposure prior to the launch of the cohort. So I'm going to invite John to say a little bit about what we've done since then. He just did another round of this in his region. So John, do you want to talk a little bit about how that went and what you learned kind of going round 2?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our second version of this offering, I did in a county in Northeast Minnesota. Just for context, it's there's only about 5,000 people in the entire county, and it's about 15-20 minutes from the Canadian border. So it's pretty rural and isolated, and 80% of the economy for this community comes from the tourism sector. And I had a discussion with the economic development folks in town. There aren't a ton of people that are sort of working in that space up in this county, and they're very supportive. But we decided that we were going to change the course from a 10-week course to an 8-week course, which I think was a good call. I mean, if we were able to pare it down to 6 or 7, that would be even better. But there's a lot of content and a lot of stuff to go through. So we have to see, about that. And so the major difference between the one that I did up in Cook County and the one that Jennifer just talked about in the Southeast was we started the process to have business owners, economic developers, and the instructors, in addition to whoever the small business development consultant was. And shortly after we started, the economic development director decided that she was going to retire, and she thought that this offering was great, but she was sort of going to bow out. And so the rest of from then on out, it was pretty much just pairing up business owners with the business coaches and the business consultants. And the discussion sort of changed from this community-wide conversation and what are some of the bigger, programming things that might happen afterwards to, just individual, businesses working on their individual business plans or their transition plans. And yeah, it worked great. We, as I mentioned, it's a tourism-dependent county, so every business owner that was in it was in the tourism sector, and in some form or another. And one of them she was a B&B owner, and she's got a couple of young kids, and she's a single mom, and she wasn't sure exactly what to do, or even if she was going to be able to sell her business. And she ended up being able to sell it after just being 2 weeks in the course. She came up with a purchase agreement just because she sort of had a push in the right direction to learn some of the things that she needed to know, but just never had time to focus on before because life gets busy. So yeah, we wrapped up this course about a month ago or so, and it had good remarks. And the county is talking about wanting to replicate the process next year as well. So I think they saw the value in it, and the business owners, the participants saw the value in it, and so their hope is that we'll be doing it again. And so we'll see if that pans out. I hope so.
And then we had a little bit of money left over from the grant because of COVID. I didn't spend any of the travel budget. So with that funding, the granting agency asked us if we wanted to use that to create any more materials. And so we went ahead and created an asynchronous workshop for community leaders. So that's rolling out now, and we'll see how that goes. But it really took materials from our in-person workshop and just put them online for folks to use when they have time and interest and don't have to rely on a one-day offering. And if you can't make it, you miss out. So we're hopeful that will have some value for economic development partners as well. So with that, I would welcome any questions, or John, if I forgot anything critical.
No, there's one question in here. Were the hands-on activities with the coach scheduled one-on-one or on an individual basis, and what was the criteria for selecting participants? So I'll let you have a
yeah. So the sessions, it was up to the economic developer to do if they wanted to try and organize a group session or do one-on-one or a combo. So we let them decide how they wanted to do that. And then what was the second question was how are participants selected? It was really open to anyone. So the economic developers did the recruitment. So I think they probably had a sense of who might be good candidates. And so, whoever registered, we accepted them into the program. We did a little bit of a pre and a post assessment for both the economic developers and the business owners to get a sense of maybe where they were at already, what their goals were, what their priorities were, what they felt like they needed to learn more about. So that also helped us tweak and tailor as we went into the course as well.
I think I'm just going to add on real quick, Jennifer, something you mentioned at the beginning was about having we had a Canvas course site. It's a platform, and there were recordings of the sessions for each week, but those recordings were not, they're not available to the world. It's only the people that took the course had availability to view. And confidentiality was a pretty important part of this course, since they were learning together and talking about, some very, personal business things. So it is important to have a conversation about confidentiality. And it seems if any group out there understands that, it's business owners. So.
Okay, does any of the research compare the potential impact of new business starts versus existing business succession? No, we have not done that. That's a great idea. And then Michael came into, what was the purpose of that? Oh, the purpose for the business owners to pay a fee was really to have some skin in the game, so that they were showing up, and we made sure that they saw value in it. Is that getting at your question, or?
I think it's a payment from the business owners, and I charge $250 in my county.
Okay, yes, the business owners paid $100. We didn't give them 100. Yep. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So thanks again for those good questions though. I like Haley's question about potential additional research activities. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Jennifer and John, both of you, for your presentation. Thanks to all of our presenters today on this great concurrent session for NACDEP 2021. Any other questions for any of the speakers? Well, we will call this session a wrap, and you can head on to your next session, which I believe are the 1890s or the 1994 session.
Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you all.
Take care, all.